so as not to eliminate human freedom, I'm disposed to hold that fortune is the arbiter of half our actions, but that it lets us control roughly the other half. I compare fortune to one of those dangerous rivers that, when they become enraged, flood the plains, destroy trees and buildings, move earth from one place and deposit it in another. Everyone flees before it, everyone gives way to its thrust without being able to halt it in any way. But this does not mean that when the river is not in flood, men are unable to take precautions by means of dikes and dams, so that when it rises next time, it will either not overflow its banks, or if it does, its force would not be so uncontrolled or damaging. The same happens with fortune. This is a passage from the beginning of the 25th chapter of The Prince. At this point, Machiavelli is working on the question of how to act out, or how to take advantage of the possibility, unpredictable but certain in a sense to happen, that fortune will intervene in human history, intervene in natural history, and provoke destruction in one way or another. The force of the analogy here is to emphasize both the unpredictability of fortune and the possibility of some preventive, providential thinking about how to take account of the certain occurrence of these unpredictable events in human history and in natural history. And the example that he gives is the example of the raging river. You can predictably say that rivers which now, like the Arno flowing through Florence, is flowing very nicely and very discreetly and rather quietly, will at some point soon, at some point unpredictably soon, flood with the impetuous waters of the mountains as the thunder bursts in the mountains produce runoff from the streams that then come and join the waters of the Arno and can produce these high waters and an extraordinary destruction of the sort that he outlines for us here. It's therefore a wonderful analogy for precisely the way in which, if one has the foresight, even in the times, especially only in the times of calm water, should one be in advance of the horrors of the high water, preparing the dikes and the levees and the bridges and so on. And he says that in Italy we have been scandalously unable to do this kind of planning in advance, but in France and in Spain we have done the people have done so much more. And he doesn't mean that in France and in Spain people have put in levees and dikes and bridges, but rather that political institutions and the institution of the monarchy have prepared the way for accounting for the devastations of providence and of the acts of fortune, by putting in place institutions and by putting in place laws and militias that allow the sovereign to deal with the catastrophes of human history and the catastrophes of natural history. Now this is therefore, it's a beautiful image. It's an image for the need for foresight, and it's foresight that is not yet specifically an attribute of the prince or of the republic, but rather is a general condition of how we should be disposed toward the world. We should, in times of calm, have foresight towards the future. It's a kind of, if you want, a kind of Epicurean way of thinking about the world. That is, within a moment of calm, you look ahead and you say, well, something, I don't know when, is going to occur that will disrupt this calm. What can I do in advance in order to minimize the catastrophe that is certain to come here? It's a simile that also has a number of very specific qualities with respect to the prince. The prince, the text of the prince is a text that is interested in the relation between horizontality and verticality. If you remember from the very beginning of the dedicatory introduction, the Machiavelli's narrator has asked for the permission and the indulgence of his readership to be someone who is on a person of low birth, looking upwards towards those from whom he is drawing analogies and addressing himself to some sovereign, someone who is much above him in station. And he gives the analogy of those who are on the plain in order to look up to the mountains must be on the lowest part of the plain to see the full height of the mountain. And by a kind of analogy, those who are on the mountain must be able to look down. You can only see the plain from above the mountain as well. So this notion of a kind of landscape, a horizontal landscape populated by these vertical mountainous outgrowths, is also a kind of map of the distribution of sovereignty, of kingship, of power in Italy at the moment, where there are people who seem to be horizontally similar, who seem to be of the same lowly status, and then there are these occasional great mountainous personalities, the Lorenzo, others, to whom one can address books, who survey the plains below them and the people on the plain below them. The sovereign, the prince, would then be vertically above the people who are on the horizon or on the plain, like this. And in that context, this example has to do with the unpredictable dynamics of the relation between verticality and horizontality, between the prince and the people who are below him and are on the plain as well. The waters flowing down catastrophically from the plain, from the mountain onto the plain, could be then thought of as a way for the text of Il Principe, the prince, to think about what is the dynamic of the relation between the sovereign and the people here. You immediately see that one of the consequences of this would be that if you accept this kind of naturalistic description, this sort of natural description of the plain and the mountain and the water flowing down, that the rules of gravity prohibit the water flowing up. That is, the dynamic is only in one direction. Destruction can only rain down from the sovereign toward the plain, those people on the plain, the masses on the plain, and you could never have a kind of corresponding move upward where a popular insurgency would climb up the mountain and take over the position of the sovereign. This is only partly what that is, this kind of naturalistic interpretation is only partly what's at issue in this moment. It's a very important part. It's a part that tends to reinforce the idea of a vertical relation of power between the sovereign and those people who are on the plain by means of this kind of gravitational law that says that water cannot flow upwards, and thus political power cannot flow upwards and replace the sovereign with the popular sovereignty of the people on the plain. But it's not the only way that this simile works, and I just want to conclude with saying a few words about another way in which this simile works. Where does he get this? Where does Machiavelli get this example, this simile? Well, he gets it in all probability from a fairly close reading of Lucretius's great poem on the nature of things. In Book 1, Lucretius describes the atomic world, the world of swirling matter and of tiny little atoms that come together accidentally and contingently and randomly. And he says we can't see those, but we can imagine them through the simile of the wind. But we can't really see the wind either, but the wind works a little bit like a flowing river. And a flowing river is something that we don't particularly pay attention to until and unless it overflows its banks and rushes down from the mountains to the plains, destroying everything in its way. Machiavelli is a very close reader of Lucretius. He knows from the environment in which he's operating in Florence the existence of the Lucretian text. He's been in conversation with people who are working with Lucretius very closely. He knows this image beautifully. And in using this Lucretian image, in using the image from the poem, Machiavelli is allowing himself the rather dangerous possibility of thinking about the river as if it were not just a natural river that flows necessarily according to the laws of nature from the heights down into the plain, but also being a kind of metaphoric river, a river that, as in Lucretius, is understood to be a simile for a disorganized movement of atoms, which, because it's disorganized, because it's unpredictable, because it works as a kind of simile, a poetic simile in Lucretius, allows Machiavelli in a very subtle way to say that the laws of nature are not the only laws, and you could have a river flowing upwards. You could have the Arno turn upwards against the mountain, and you could, according to the laws not of nature but of the Lucretian text that he's also quoting right at this moment, you could have a popular sovereignty take over the vertical sovereignty of the mountainous currents from which the water seems to have flown, but up to which the Lucretian river will also flow.